This story won't be like all the others. It contains no maniacs, no ghosts, and no cultists, but instead there is something truly mysterious and sinister, something that occasionally makes the blood run cold. Yes, this happened to me. I can even name the year, 2017. I was looking for a job as an electrician in my city at the time. However, I was destined to travel far, far beyond the borders of my homeland, to the South Pole, to Antarctica. To start, it's worth explaining exactly how I got there. We were recruited through an advertisement, the whole team, meaning the auxiliary support staff, cooks, doctors, electricians. I managed to jump into the very last carriage, so to speak. The coordinators contacted me exactly 3 weeks before departure to the destination, told me all the conditions, and then, without hesitation, I went to their office and signed a 1-year contract. Interesting work in a picturesque place, plus the pay is good. Why not? And then the day finally came when the team was put on a plane and sent straight to Cape Town. For those who don't know, that's a city in the Republic of South Africa, and a rather beautiful one at that, located in the southwest of the country on the Atlantic coast. We stayed there for literally a couple of days, and then we were all loaded onto the legendary vessel Akademik Fyodorov and set off to plow the expanses of the ocean. To be honest, I've never seen anything more beautiful in my life. A deep blue abyss, not a single island around, not a single hint of civilization, only the blue sky, the hot sun, and salt water. For almost the entire journey, we were accompanied by a calm sea. I often left my cabin and strolled along the deck, enjoying the beautiful view of the ocean. Only after several days did we finally reach the ice pier in Thala Hills at the Russian Antarctic station Progress. By the way, there aren't many of ours. Only 7, if I'm not mistaken. At least official ones. Vostok, Mirny, Bellingshausen, Novolazarevskaya, Progress, Ruskaya, and Molodezhnaya. The last 2 are seasonal. They have no permanent winterers. Our specific group was sent on a sledge crawler trek to the hard-to-reach station Vostok. However, we didn't stay there long, and after a short stop and refueling, moved in an unknown direction to the Bezimyania, Nameless station. Yes, it was literally called Nameless. It was built specifically for our expedition group in the middle of the icy desert. I understand that the corporation owners had been preparing for this task for a very long time and very thoroughly, sinking more than $1 million into it to ensure everything went smoothly and as it should. But time soon showed that luck was clearly not on their side. As we began to approach the station, I noticed several armed men. They were standing by a booth that looked like a checkpoint, intently watching the approaching convoy. They didn't look like regular military. They seemed more like mercenaries, although they were armed with Army AK-74s. Only those rifles are capable of withstanding such severe cold, I thought, sitting in the crawler and looking out the slightly fogged window. But wait a second. What is armed security doing here? Is this some kind of restricted facility? Are they conducting tests of some sort? I decided to direct this question to our coordinator, who had been acting like a counselor in a children's camp the whole time, gathering our large company and telling us what to do, how to behave, and so on. Before this, he had been very talkative, but now he suddenly grew somber and answered in a low voice, "Standard security, nothing special about it." But intuition told me that those brutes were patrolling for something other than icy beauty. They were freezing here for a reason. As it turned out later, I was 100% right. We entered the station without any incidents. We were met, escorted to the residential block, where we could leave our bags, and then directed to the canteen. We were fed and given drinks, after which the whole group moved to the main hall intended for lectures. There, All the newcomers were already being awaited by the management of this wonderful complex, headed by a certain Dmitry Alexeyevich Govorukin. He was the one who briefed us. Dear colleagues, welcome to the Bezimyanaya Station, a bastion of science and progress on this beautiful icy continent. You are probably still wondering what the goal of this expedition is. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose all the details to you, but I will provide the general information. 5 kilometers south of our station, there is a mountain. Inside it, our scientists have found a cave, in the ice of which a very curious object, more than 100,000 years old, is hidden. This is a very valuable artifact, and therefore access to it will not be granted to everyone. Please treat this with understanding. Now, the following. The auxiliary personnel, meaning all of you, will have Category B clearance. You will be able to move almost throughout the entire complex, with the exception of the research block. Only scientists and engineers are admitted there. They have their own regulations and tasks. You won't really cross paths. And yes, your supervisors will approach you and... The man pulled back his sleeve and looked at his watch. Literally 10 to 15 minutes. They will tell you about your schedule, duties, and everything you need to know. I think I've said everything I wanted to. If you have any questions left, feel free to ask. I'll be glad to answer. With that, the director finished his introductory speech, and the people in the hall began to ask questions. Everyone except me. I sat silently, processing the information. Who or what did they find there? 100,000 years? Could it be a UFO or the remains of an ancient civilization? Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted by a rather large man who had quietly approached me, sat down nearby, and extended his hand. Hey there, buddy. You're our new electrician, right? I'm Vasily Petrovich. I'll be your mentor for the entire coming year. Zhenya, very nice to meet you, I said, extending my hand in return and immediately staring at the long black cloak my companion was wearing. The thought immediately flashed through my mind. Why on earth does he need a cloak in Antarctica? Who is he trying to impress here? I decided to save this question for better times, since I still had to work with this man. Yes, likewise, Jack. Do you drink? Well, in moderation. Now, that's the right answer. All right, let's go. Enough listening to this boredom. I'm going to get you up to speed. Having finished our introductory chat, Vasily Petrovich and I soon left the main hall and headed to his, or rather, now our office, where in the future I would spend most of my working time, filling out logs and other documentation regarding the monitoring of the power supply. Generally, about 70% of my work consisted of keeping reports, and only occasionally did I go outside to do a round of the entire station, including the generator room. No, that was for the future. For now, my mentor and I were approaching the office, where a table was already set with snacks and spirits. It was clear the man had prepared seriously for meeting his future colleague. After all, we had a whole year of work ahead of us. Come in, don't be shy. This is your future home for the next 365 days. It might be beautiful here, but there's absolutely nothing to do. Petrovich went to the tape recorder, turned down the volume slightly, and then filled 2 glasses, handing one to me. Well, here's to our acquaintance. I'm sure you're a good lad. We'll get along. I tried the first batch of alcohol brought to the station, after which we began to boisterously discuss various topics: politics, work, personal life, and so on. I won't retell everything. I'll just say that our friendly gathering lasted about 3 hours. By that time, it was already dark outside, and I wanted to get some good rest after the journey, so, saying a polite goodbye to my colleague, I headed back to the residential block. My badge indicated the room number assigned me. I moved in there, spending the rest of the day unpacking my things and preparing for my first night in the new place. I suppose I won't say much about my work. It's rather tedious and uninteresting. A bunch of reports, territory rounds. You get up early at 6 in the morning, and then the routine begins. After 1800 is free time. You either read a book or work out in the gym. This boring, quiet, measured life continued for 4 months. Until one day, a group of scientists arrived, having extracted something mysterious and unknown from the Antarctic ice. That day I was making my regular rounds, moving across the base territory, when the station gates opened and a convoy of tracked vehicles drove inside. On one of the cargo trucks lay an object that immediately caught my attention. It was a huge block of ice, cut into an almost perfect cube. It was covered with a rubber tarp, apparently to hide the contents from curious eyes. Whatever was in there, it took them a long time to unload it. First, they lifted the ice block with a crane, and then they took it to the research block. It was a massive hangar, standing separate from all the other premises. No one was allowed in there except for security, directors, and scientists. Entrance was strictly forbidden, and the armed guys standing nearby served as a reminder of this by their very appearance. From Junolan, my obsessions with this topic began. I was curious to find out what they had discovered there. I managed to discuss this news not only with Petrovich, but also with a dozen other employees who I crossed paths with during our free time. But no one had exact information, only conjectures. And so, about 2 weeks had passed since that mysterious artifact was brought to our base. By this time, my fervor had already cooled down, and I had immersed myself in work once again. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. One day at lunch, I was summoned by the management, not Vasily Petrovich, but other guys who stood higher up. They told me that something had broken in the research block. Supposedly, the scientists were complaining that the light was short-circuiting in one of the rooms. I was instructed to go and see what was going on. They issued me a pass and alerted security over the radio that an electrician would be coming to them soon. A few minutes later, I was heading toward that very hangar, which was the center of all the gossip and legends at the station. At that moment, I felt afraid and curious at the same time. On one hand, I wanted to peek inside and understand why we were all gathered here, but on the other hand, I didn't. Very soon, upon reaching the hangar gates, I was led in by a guard. After that, one of them, who was clearly older, escorted me into the building. Strangely enough, there was no one inside. It seemed the scientists and engineers were on their lunch break. The only ones left to keep order were the guards outside. Right from the doorway, an object covered with a tarp caught my eye. It stood right in the center of the first floor and was much smaller than when it had first been brought to the base. It was logical to assume that the scientists had decided to melt the ice to carefully extract their find without damaging its integrity. The room the officer took me to was on the second floor. It was something like a conference hall for various meetings. The lights weren't working in the room, which is exactly why I had been invited to fix the problem. At first, the guard stayed near me, but soon he wanted to step away. I don't know, maybe nature called urgently. But ultimately, he left me alone, saying that I should leave the premises on my own after finishing the work. In fact, that is exactly what happened, though with a slight nuance. Having fixed the malfunction, I went back down to the first floor and noticed that object. There was something so magnetic about it that an idea immediately popped into my head. I looked around and, making sure once again that no one was nearby, I walked up to the tarp and lifted it. At that moment, a wave of adrenaline washed over me. I finally saw what my colleagues could only guess at. Inside the block of ice was a human, or something very similar to one. Since there was little light in the hall, I couldn't make out his head, but the silhouette was clearly visible. Judging by the 2-meter height and muscular build, it was a man, but he was somehow different. Wrong. From his back, appendages similar to limbs protruded. At that moment, I couldn't even guess what they were. And of course, he was completely naked. His skin was as pale as snow, as if all the blood had been sucked out of the alien, and it had some kind of red veins. Though that's not surprising, considering the creature had been in the Antarctic ice for 100,000 years. Suddenly, I heard footsteps from the hallway. It was the guard returning to check on my progress. Returning the tarp to its place, I quickly moved to meet him, simultaneously reflecting on what I had just seen. Naturally, upon returning to the office, I told Petrovich everything in the smallest detail, as he had no idea I'd been sent to the secret research block. He listened to my story attentively and advised me not to blab about it to anyone else. It was sound advice, and I took it. However, the fact that a real monster was right next door to me and other people gave me no peace, even if it was in a frozen state. But it couldn't have been a human. The body structure was too unusual, plus that creepy skin and the appendages on the back. It's a good thing I didn't see the head, or I would have made a mess of myself right there out of fear. In short, after some thought and hesitation, I decided to go and write a resignation letter. After all, it was pretty creepy being in this place. But I was quickly brought back to Earth. The manager said with a smirk that the ship with the replacements would only arrive in 6 months, and I wasn't going anywhere from here. In short, sit tight and don't make a fuss. You're here for the long haul, Genyok. Not to say that this made me feel any better, but the sense of helplessness soon transformed into a stage of accepting the inevitable. I continued to work, looking at that ill-fated hangar with trepidation every time. And there wouldn't be this story if, on one of those days, a real tragedy hadn't struck our station. And all because of human curiosity, damn it to hell. It all happened late at night when all the personnel, myself included, were in our rooms sleeping peacefully. At some point, the muffled sound of gunfire rang out, and believe it or not, even half asleep, I couldn't understand where it was coming from. There was a heavy blizzard outside that night. Visibility was 30 meters, no more. It just so happened that my window looked directly out at the research block. And as I looked out, several more shots thundered, but louder this time. I even saw the flashes of automatic fire in the street. And after them, screams, terrible, soul-piercing screams, as if a person was being torn to pieces and could do nothing about it. My awakened neighbors immediately ran out into the corridor and began loudly discussing what had happened. I got dressed too and went out. But instead of standing still, I headed for my office. There were many tools there: screwdrivers, hammers, a small crowbar. All of this could be used for defense. Although, if people armed with assault rifles couldn't eliminate the threat, then no pieces of iron were going to help here. The situation was developing too quickly. The atmosphere was heating up by the second. Soon, the entire residential complex was filled with people who quickly realized that someone had attacked our base and measures needed to be taken. Employees began blocking the doors, the main entrance, and the fire exits so that someone could not penetrate the building. They thought this would stop it. I alone harbored no illusions and understood that if the soldiers couldn't kill the defrosted creature, then very soon it would get to all of us. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. It's worth noting that during the night hours, the main lighting in the residential complex was turned off. This was done for the sake of economy. However, the building was not left entirely without light. Dim emergency lamps were on, so that people could at least reach the toilet if necessary. Well, the entire subsequent slaughter took place in exactly that setting. The creature entered the complex not through the doors, but through a first-floor window, right on the side where the people were crowding. Utter chaos broke out immediately. Everyone started running wherever they could, and the thing, it just ran from side to side and tore apart everyone who crossed its path. At some point, I remembered Vasily Petrovich. I really wanted to know if he was alive, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. After wandering the dark corridors for a bit and failing to find my supervisor, I soon returned to the office and locked myself in to stay out of harm's way. I thought that in this way, I could avoid meeting the bloodthirsty monster. But it was not to be. I don't remember how long I sat there in total solitude, listening to the screams of people from different directions. But in an instant, a person knocked on the door I had blocked. Or rather, no, not like that. He was pounding, begging to be saved from the pursuit of that thing. And at first, I had thoughts of pretending no one was home. But then my conscience kicked in. I decided to act humanely. However, as soon as I approached the door and started clearing the barricade, a desperate scream rang out from the other side, and then everything went silent. I stood in total silence, trying to catch any sound at all, but I heard nothing but the beating of my own heart. At that moment, I still had hope that the monster would leave, and I would manage to avoid a confrontation. But a powerful blow to the door, which came just seconds later, crossed everything out. It was still in the corridor. Apparently, like me, it was listening. It felt that someone else was nearby and wanted to see who was lurking there. Honestly, I had no illusions that a crowbar, a screwdriver, or anything else would help me. Therefore, I decided to simply accept my fate. As soon as the creature burst into the room, I didn't run anywhere, hide, or get into a fight. I just stood in place and looked straight ahead. The thing clearly did not expect such a reaction. Instead of lunging and tearing me to shreds, it slowly approached me and began to sniff. At that moment, I tried not to look at its face, but nevertheless, I was able to catch some features out of the corner of my eye, namely, teeth as sharp as needles, white eyes with black pupils, and terrible wrinkled skin. A strange, musty smell emanated from the creature, but I didn't pay it any mind. After all, when you stand face to face with death, priorities somehow change, and you can endure a little. The encounter with the monster lasted only a few seconds, but for me, it was an eternity. It seemed like it was about to change its mind and finish me off after all. Like those poor souls whose mutilated bodies lay all over the residential complex. No, it never happened. I'm still wondering why. Maybe it didn't like my smell, or the creature wasn't looking for flesh at all, but for something less tangible. Fear, for example. I don't know, but I do know that there was clearly something of a human in it. While the mutant was near me, it didn't just smell me, but also examined my clothes with curiosity, and at the end, it even noticed Vasily Petrovich's black cloak, which was hanging on a hook in the office. Is it even necessary to say that the nothing decided to take it along, tossing a quick glance at me before leaving, as if asking if I would mind? It might sound funny, but I wasn't laughing then. I just stood there as if rooted to the spot, as if my boots were glued to the floor. I was only able to move when it began to get light outside. I heard some strange sounds like the flapping of wings, and in fact, that's exactly what they were. Huge membranous wings opened on the back of that creature, on which it flew further and further away from our base in search of its new prey. I think you can guess how the events unfolded after that. The management decided to hush up the story, chalking everything up to an accident. Many witnesses of the incident were bribed with fairly large sums of money, and the relatives of the deceased were told that there had been a severe storm which was supposedly the cause of so many casualties, especially since the bodies had miraculously disappeared immediately after all the survivors were evacuated to the nearest station, Vostok. Petrovich, by the way, was also saved. On that fateful night, slightly tipsy, he was sleeping peacefully in his room and didn't hear what was happening behind the wall. That is what protected him. We crossed paths with him many times after that, both at Vostok and on the ship that took us home. He even jokingly grumbled that I couldn't protect his favorite cloak. And although I smiled, I still remembered with fear that creature, which right now is flying somewhere in the darkness of the night, searching for someone who suits its taste.